Now, Gabe, at the heart of the pandemic in 2020, in the heat of all the chaos, you were at an event, a church event in Moscow. And as I understand it, this was an outdoor event, and you ended up getting arrested. Take us through the events that day.
Yeah, so that was September 23rd, 2020. I was went to a psalm sing protest. Well, we like to sing psalms and hymns and protest. That's how we like to respond to city and government overreach. And so we went to a psalm sing protest at City Hall in the parking lot to protest our mayor and city council's unconstitutional emergency order. And that order was they'd signed it and started that order on July 2nd. They renewed it, and at the end of July, they renewed it at the end of August, and then they were voting again to renew it through January this time in September. And that order was basically when you're outside, you had to wear a mask or stand 6 feet apart. So if you weren't wearing a mask, you had to stand 6 feet apart. If you're wearing a mask, you could walk side by side with each other outside, at parks, everything outside. And so that was, the government didn't have the authority to tell us what to put on our face, didn't have the authority to tell us what to wear, didn't have authority to tell us how far apart to stand. They originally tried to apply this order to churches, but I sued the governor with a bunch of friends back in June, I believe, and that order, the church order, got lifted. And so our city council was just trying to apply this order by themselves to everyone standing outside. So when we walked up to City Hall, I'll never forget, we walked into the parking lot, and the mayor had paid city staff to spray paint circles 6 feet apart from each other, so the cops could objectively see that we were standing 6 feet apart, or we're not standing, or violating the order by not standing 6 feet apart and not wearing masks. And I remember just walking into the parking lot and seeing all these polka dots in the parking lot and being like, what are they for? And then I looked up and I saw the cops. And we've done several protests, psalm sing protests to this point. No one in the city, period, had ever been cited for breaking this emergency order. No one had ever been arrested. No one had ever, they'd never enforced it. And so I went there that day just going to sing psalms, and obviously they had more intentions there. And so there's about 200 of us, kind of mostly from my church, some from the community. And as soon as we started singing, the cops, my arresting officer, Officer Will Crisalt, walked up to my mom. I mean, it was such a cowardly move. Walked up to my mom and approached her first. She said, "This is my son." And so, you know how the COVID rules work. Family are allowed to stand next to each other, but friends aren't. In the COVID rules and how they work.
Science, Gabe.
Science, sir. Family is fine, but friends aren't. And so she was fine. And then they came up to me, and I put my arm around my buddy Tyler, and I said, "This is my friend Tyler." And so the officer, Will Crisalt, asked for my driver's license, and I said, "No, I'm not going to give it to you. I'm exercising my First Amendment rights. And you, officer, swore an oath to defend my First Amendment rights against domestic enemies, like our mayor and city council." And so we kind of went back and forth, and obviously none of that really resonated with the officer, who literally swore an oath to defend my constitutional rights against my city council. And about 4 times back and forth, and then he finally said, "Please give me your driver's license." And I said, "No, you were wrong, and I'm exercising my First Amendment rights." And so he proceeded. The craziest thing, you go back and watch the video, he had to take my hymn book away from me to handcuff me and arrest me. And was in America. I had people after that moment. I had people all over the world email me, and I'll never forget this one email that stuck out to me as a pastor, I think in India, who had also been some sort of missionary in Russia, I think at the time. He emailed me and said, "I thought it was Moscow, Russia. And then I Googled it further and realized it was Moscow, Idaho. And never in my wildest dreams would I've ever imagined someone in America get arrested for exercising their religious freedoms. Never."
Wow.
And that blew,
incredible.
It hit, it just hit me really hard.
Yeah, I bet it did. And Gabe, now we've recounted this story, but now there's an update, and you tell us what you did legally. Did you brought a case against who, and how did it go? And then now you've had a judgment on it. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So after my arrest, I obviously had a misdemeanor complaint against me. I had a criminal complaint against me I had to deal with and resolve with the city. And I won that criminal complaint in January of 2021. And then I was planning on suing the city. Thomas More Society was counseling me and recommended me to sue. And so I went and met with my chief of police and my arresting officer. After the criminal complaint was dropped, I went and met with them, and I told them straight up, I was like, I'm thinking about suing the city, and I don't want to sue the cops. I want to sue my mayor. I want to sue the supervisor. I want to sue the attorney, that we're all kind of at the top of all this. And I remember meeting my chief of police, telling him that, and I said, why did you, what is your view of the Constitution? What is your view of First Amendment rights? And he said two things in that meeting that really was problematic. One, he said, I never took a good civics class in high school or college. And I was like, dude, you're holding a badge and a gun. You should have that figured out way by now. And the second thing related to that, he said, I don't know what I think about your First Amendment rights right now. Someday I'll tell you. That was the weirdest response. My arresting officer was even more egregious. He said, I would arrest you all over again. And this is after I won my criminal complaint against the city. Even the city had already admitted that they had no case. And my arresting officer said they'd do it all over again. So I remember literally walking out of that meeting, calling my wife and saying, babe, I think I actually need to sue the cops too. They don't know what they're doing. They haven't learned anything. And I don't think they were being honest with me. I think Officer Wilker Salt was being more honest with me than the chief of police in that meeting. And so I filed a civil lawsuit against the city, and it took 3 years. Here we are, 2020. And then just last week, I won my civil case against the city, and the judge just lambasted my city for incompetence, for not understanding their own emergency orders and how their own emergency order even recognized and protected my First Amendment rights. It even stated
there was a protection, correct me if I'm wrong, for First Amendment freedom if people were going to protest, to exercise that specific ordinance, that order had that in it. So it really wasn't something you could be arrested for to begin with, correct?
That's correct. And part of the problem there, so Black Lives Matter, after that resolution was signed in July, they came and did their protest in July 2020 in our downtown. We did our psalm singing in July, August, so forth. The reason why I was arrested was for two reasons. One was because I was a political opponent. I was running for county commissioner. None of them liked me. None of them voted for me. And I was a thorn in their side. I mean, I was open against the pandemic. I had a national audience against them on their own masking and social distancing orders. And secondly, I was religiously targeted. They didn't like our psalm singing protest. It bothered them significantly, as the emails showed. The community didn't like the liberals in our community didn't like the protest. They were putting all sorts of pressure on the mayor and the city council to act. And so combine my political relationship and my religious affiliation, that's why they arrested me. And they did it in kind of this cloudy frenzy of we gotta stop Gabe, we gotta stop Christ Church and what they're doing. And so they messed up big time.
Yeah, they certainly seem to have done that. And it's an interesting, because we're starting to see now, we talk on our podcast a lot about how, in your case included in this, the government overreaches that happened in COVID and during that time, it's like that fear. It's a very interesting dynamic to see the fear make people kind of forget about the Constitution or put the Constitution aside. It's like those are the times when it's difficult that you have to stand on those rights, or else you saw in COVID how easily there are people who want to push them away.
The wonderful thing about my victory here with my little town in Moscow is that it's a reminder that the mayor and city council cannot suspend your constitutional rights. We needed that reminder, which is crazy enough. But related to that is our mayor and city council didn't even believe in their own masking and social distancing order. In September, 3 weeks before I was arrested, the mayor was officiating a wedding outside with city council members present, not wearing a mask and not social distancing, having at it, partying away. In March 2020, when the mayor shut down downtown businesses, which I led a big business rally against, which is another frustration for them, our mayor shut down downtown along with city council. I think it was March 20th or March 25th. I forget the dates of 2020. And then within weeks, he was driving outside of city limits, barely outside of city limits, going golfing and drinking beer with his buddies. He didn't believe, they didn't believe in any of these masking and social distancing. The two things were driving them. Their liberal, well, three things. Their liberal worldview, which is tyrannical and crazy. The second thing is the fear that was being stirred up in this whole pandemic. And then thirdly, they made tons of money off this shutdown. Brandy Sullivan, one of the city council members, made tons of money. I think it was like $200,000, $300,000 off this. Gina Treviso, her husband, Art Bedke, the current mayor now, who's a city council member, they all made out like bandits through all this. It's super wicked. And yet they arrested me for exercising my First Amendment rights, knowing fully well that I had my First Amendment rights were protected far outside of their own tyrannical leadership.
You know, it seems like you went above and beyond, and I'd love for you to speak to this, because there are people who, when they see a case like this, they don't know the details. They're like, oh, that person's suing because they just want to walk away with money. But you went to the police, as you were saying, and you were hoping to not add them, right, to the lawsuit. You were hoping, it sounds like, to get from them something that showed you that they learned a lesson, that this wouldn't happen again. You didn't get that. But what is, and I think you just answered it a little bit, but I want to give you a chance to really speak to this, because the long-term effects of what happened during COVID and your case are really important. So what was your primary motivator in launching into that legal action after all of this concluded?
Yeah. Let me back up on that question. So I started running for county commissioner March 11th, before COVID was like, there's no frenzy. And the only reason why I was running for county commissioner is because I couldn't get anybody else to. I worked for 6 months trying to find other people to run for. And the current county commissioners had voted to raise our taxes 4 years in a row, making our county the highest tax per capita house county in Idaho. It's crazy. They're crazy. They're liberals are crazy. And so I started off just being like this, hey man, I just want to lower your property taxes and make sure you guys have the money to raise your kids here in town. That was my campaign. And then like 10 days later, 11 days later, the mayor shut down downtown, and my campaign just kind of took on a whole new, I was like, oh man, our problems in our county are way bigger than this. We're this liberal county in a big conservative state. There's only 2 liberal counties in the state of Idaho, and we're one of them. And so my run for county commissioner became about, hey, the mayor and the city council can't do this to you guys. They can't shut down your businesses. They can't tell you to stay home. They can't tell you what to wear on your face. And so I became a significant political opposition to them. Like I said, I led open up business rally protests and all this stuff. And so I had this political motivation. And then when they tried to shut down churches, I had this religious motivation in all this. And that's why I sued the governor and so forth. And so I had met with, even March, April, May, August, I had met with or emailed or texted our city council a lot of times, data, reasonable emails, texted them. And then I met with our sheriff that summer, who was fantastic through all this. And then I met with our chief of police in August, just saying, what are you thinking? I'm running for county commissioner. What are you thinking about these unconstitutional orders that the mayor is wanting you to enforce? What are you thinking? And that meeting was just, I left that meeting thinking like, he's going to enforce these measures if push comes to shove. That was in August. And I was trying to build relationships. I was trying not to be this bomb thrower who's just launching emails and launching text and being kind of a nuisance. I was actually trying to build a relationship and help them see that the Constitution is protecting certain rights that they can't just remove from a fearful emergency order. So I labored really hard even before I got arrested. And then in September, I got arrested. And then I reached out to meet with everybody. I said, I'll meet with you, Mayor. I'll meet with you, City Council. I'll meet with you. No one wanted to meet during the criminal complaint. Once the criminal complaint was done, I reached out to the cops, the chief of police and the cops, as I already mentioned. So I labored hard through all this. And after my criminal complaint was dropped, again, I reached out to the mayor. I reached out to the city council and said, glad to meet. And then when I did the lawsuit, we had got a new mayor the other mayor's term was termed out, was his term was up. We got a new mayor, was a city council member at the time. I reached out to meet with him, and he wouldn't meet. So I've been constantly trying to reach out, and by the grace of God, the only voice, not just me, but the protesters, the people who were, understood freedom and the Constitution, that I kind of by default ended up representing over time through media. The only voice we ended up having was you guys, was Laura Ingraham, was Glenn Beck, was all the interviews that I've gone on since 2020. That was the voice we ended up having. The city council, when we petitioned the city council, they wouldn't listen to us. When we petitioned the mayor, he wouldn't listen to us. And so, by the grace of God, the voice that ended up actually having more of an impact on our city and how they handled things was the media, and the good kind of media.
Well, Gabe, it's been an ordeal, and now it looks like you're getting at least a resolution. It looks like what you're hoping for. What in this whole saga, what are you kind of hoping the message is going forward? What do you hope you can tell people about it? What do you hope people take from it?
Yeah. I think a couple things. For one, is Christians, we need to be more convicted about what the Bible teaches about worship, about gathering for church, and we need to be able to read the story better. We have, I think, for far too long, Christians have been too soft or too nice or they've believed liberals too much. We always thought that there's a neutral ground that we can, work towards, and everyone could exist, peacefully. But the liberals are out. They're out for blood. I mean, they're out for. They want to force abortion down your state's throat. They want to force gay marriage down your state's throat. They want to force a mask on your children. They want to force. They're out for blood. They're trying to win a culture war, and Christians have been, I think, too passive about the culture war. We need to be far more convicted about the Word of God in the public square than we are. And then I'd say, lastly, the third thing is, a little bit of courage begets courage, and you saw that with President Trump. This president who, is kind of all over the map, but the one thing he did do well was show courage and show how to fight. And maybe not all his fights were that good or well planned or the right ones, but he showed courage. And so we need to be more courageous with the truth of God's word and also the truth of the Constitution. If the church, I'm convinced, if the church never would have shut down, this pandemic and all the lies that surrounded this pandemic never would have happened to the extent that it did. And so I want the church to be more courageous and be more concerned about what God's ordered them to do, and not so much concerned about what liberals are telling them, at the city council level or even the governor level.
Well, Gabe, we appreciate you taking the time coming on. And as the case develops, I know that there'll be you're going to be sitting down for a settlement soon. If there's something new that comes up, we definitely want to have you back to speak more. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.